Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode. I am here with Siera Jane Grace. Siera Jane Grace is the founder of her signature process, A Compass to Ecstasy. She takes couples from sexually shut down to orgasmic bliss. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited as well. I feel like I haven't been on a podcast for a while and I am full of like a million things to say. So
whoa, we're in for a treat then. I'd like for you to give us a little bit about your background and tell us kind of how you got into the work that you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's often a really common question because everyone's like, how did you decide to become sort of like sex priestess or sex coach, whatever word makes you feel less like intimidated. Do you know what? Ever since I was really young, I always had a very high sex drive. Even before I even had sex, I had always had this feeling like my yoni and my womb were like talking to me, and like I had this like fire like in my womb, and I didn't really know how to place that like anywhere. And as I got older and began having sexual experiences, I started realizing that they weren't anything like what like my friends were experiencing. And I was like, am I like crazy? Like I'm having these amazing sort of meditative experiences with partners who were still like, you know, fairly young, like early 20s. So like not very experienced, and still like I'm having, these beautiful experiences with like men, and all my friends are like, that's not like what we're experiencing. And I'm like, okay. So for a really long time, I was like, I feel like my life's purpose is like sex work, but I didn't know how to place that anywhere in the world. Cause the only place I thought would be like, I'm going to be a stripper. Like, I don't know. So I just kind of like continued on my own path. And then it was sort of after I had my daughter, she's 11 now, that I began like sort of my spiritual journey a little bit deeper. And then I came across like Tantra, cosmic sexuality, Taoism. And like the first time I came across the information, it was just like all the puzzle pieces like fell into place. I was like, ding, 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 ding. I was like, holy shit, like, that's it. That's what I've been like working with this whole time. Like, this is my calling. So like literally right away, I dove into learning everything I can because I'm like an information junkie. And yeah, I guess the rest is history. Since then, I've studied, everything from cosmic sexuality, Taoism, Tantra, polarity, everything I can get my hands on pretty much around relationships and sex, from ancient like practices to more like modern practices to kink, like you got it, name it, I've done it. And yeah, just trying to become as much of an expert as I can, but also have as many experiences as I can, and help serve like the collective and women in particular in healing like our trauma around this topic.
That's amazing. And I think it's so cool that you kind of always had the codes, but you discovered it's almost like probably when you were diving into like learning all about it, it was more like of a remembering or like giving words to something that you already knew.
Oh my gosh, so much so that like puts it absolutely perfectly. So many of the practices, I was like, I do that. I've been doing that I've been doing that since I was like 12 years old. Like, I was like, oh, okay. Like that's like a like ancient practice, like cool. Like, and I've even to this day, like layers are sort of like, like kind of falling away where I'm like, only a couple months ago, I realized as I dive like more into biology, and sort of the topic of a lot of people often ask me like, oh, like, because we get into like the idea of like monogamy and more polyamorous relationships and stuff. And there's a lot of people recently asking me like, oh, like are men naturally like meant to like spread their seed, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, yes, like in like theory, biologically, yes, like anything that has small gametes, which is what men have. So sperm, whether it's like men, plants, mushrooms, birds, whatever, they are obviously like biologically designed to spread that seed. That's why the seeds are made tiny so that they can like spread. But that doesn't mean that by any means we're slaves to our biology, right? And I started digging into like what that looks like on the female side, because I was like, well, yes, like that's like in theory they are meant to do that, but on the female side we also have our like biological desires. And one of them that I didn't realize I had been doing, like, again, like going back to like sort of my past for so long, when I was younger and I lived in Toronto, I took the subway every day. And I was like 20, mid-20s. And and I would sit in the subway with my headphones on, and I'd like look around at all the men, and I would choose in my head like which man I want to have sex with. And I used to think like, am I like losing my mind? Like, does anybody else do this? And it's not even like I planned on doing anything about it. Like at the time, like I had very few partners, like I had no plans on like flirting with them, like even making eye contact. But I would just like in my mind, just sort of like get a feel for like, and like, I don't know. I was like, when I talked to the women again, they were sort of like, I think you're crazy. But now like going into like the biological side of like what women have as their cues for how we take on the world in that like way, it's like, yes, like it is normal for you as a woman, if you're not dissociated from like your womb and like your pussy, to walk into a room and associate and figure out like who would be your best partner, who is your biological like best like match, like who would be the alpha male, who's going to offer you like the best possible sperm connection, whatever it is. And like, does that mean that I'm a slave to that? No, but it is something that like that I think that I was doing for so long. I had no idea why. I still do to this day. And that, yeah, like it's just those funny little practices that when you're not dissociated from your womb and your yoni, that I had been doing for so long. And now I'm trying to teach those to other women.
That's so cool. What do you think about the kind of spiritual trend, at least in some spiritual communities, to embracing like polyamorous relationships? And I just love to hear your thoughts. I don't have any judgments about that, except that personally, I've never really seen a woman that was particularly fulfilled by that long term, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, we aren't like by any means like slaves to our biology. So that like as like a defense for like any man who's using that as a defense, like is ridiculous. Yeah. Like if that was the case, then like, I'm just going to go around to all those men and have sex with them and have the best babies. Like, no, like, that's insane. Right. I'm sure as you know as well, like when you're like fertile, then every month I would just be like jumping on like everybody to have a baby. Like every month I have to have an argument with my womb where I'm like, we're not doing that again. Like, and then she's like, good. And I'm like, I should. Like, no, not a slave to our biology. So yeah. That just means that it's a personal choice, right? Like that's what it really comes down to. Like it's a complete personal choice about whether or not you feel that like one person can fulfill all of your needs, or whether or not you feel that like you need multiple people to do so. And I feel like the more, and I'll be honest, like as when I first dove into this work, and the first like really hardcore teacher training and stuff that I took was very much about like divine union, like nobody like steps inside of like that like sort of container. And so I was judgy at that point. Like if I go back and I look like at myself in that space, like but now I've come to a place where I'm like, listen, every single person is different, everyone's needs and desires is different, and everyone's journey is going to be different. That might work for you for a time, and then you go, that didn't like quite like fit me. And so now I have like absolutely zero judgments on like how people decide to participate in their relationships. What I do is, when clients come to me, I want to always dig into what's the underlying energy that's making you choose this. Yeah. So whether it's like a kink, whether it's like a more like polyamorous relationship, like what is the underlying energy? Because sometimes like we, like you said, there's like fads and trends, and like we see things and we're like, oh, that seems like kind of cool, and maybe that would fill my needs and all that kind of stuff. But like, what's really driving that? Because when we dig into that, then we will be able to actually find ways to like either heal what's not being like fulfilled, opposed to just like sort of like band-aid fixing things, right? It's easy to be like, oh, like I think I want that, and then you do it and you're like, oh, that didn't feel right, like that's not what I wanted at all. So it's really that digging in, like what is it that's really driving this? And often like it's like childhood trauma and mommy and daddy issues and all that kind of fun stuff.
Fun stuff. Yeah. That's cool. I really like that perspective. And I think you're right. I think it is definitely a personal choice. But we just have to be really honest with ourselves. Because it seems, I mean, I don't have any experience with this. Like, I love monogamy, but from people that I've known, or even people that I've followed on Instagram, it seems like a lot of guys love this idea, and then women go along with it, and it just doesn't end up. But this is just my like totally biased, like what I personally have seen. So like I said, no judgment, and everyone has to find what works for them.
Exactly. Yeah. When it comes to like sex and sexuality, like we have such like deep ingrained like shame around like pretty much the entire thing. So I'm finding like the more that I can come to a complete, like absolutely zero judgment, zero shame, like involved, even if the things aren't like my personal like jam or like really don't align like with what I believe, that doesn't matter, because like at the end of the day, like we need to break down the shame. We have to get rid of it. Like nothing good is grown in that space.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, just like kind of starting. I mean, how amazing would it be if we were able to start from a blank slate with no shame and just build from that?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you talk about how sex often can become a last priority when the stresses of everyday life are already taxing enough for each individual. How can we work on prioritizing our sex lives when we are all so busy and exhausted in our society?
Right. Yes. That is such a huge part of like what I mean, especially like as like someone who has 2 children, who homeschools my children, like, you know, there is, yeah, it's just constant, right? Like there's constant reasons, like I'm running a business, you're running a business, like you're making podcasts, whatever it is that you're doing, there's a million different reasons. I just got back from the gym, like whatever it is to, and then you have 2 people trying to bring those 2 things together and also be present in that moment. And that can be really complicated. And I think that, so in my practice, like what I always say is you book sex dates, and like people come up on against this one hard because people are just like, well, that's not like romantic. Like what's romantic about like that? Like, oh, like that doesn't sound like, you know, very spontaneous. Like this isn't like a rom-com. Like, and I was like, yes, well, no one's life is a fucking rom-com, pardon my language.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. So like the reality is we work as a society around calendars, right? Like if you book something into your calendar, that means it has priority. And like what you want to be doing is prioritizing your relationship, your like intimacy, your pleasure. And so if that means putting it on the calendar because that's how we function as a society, then do it. Like, because there's also this really beautiful thing that happens when you like decide to book a sex date with your partner. First, there's like this great part where you get to be like, whoever's coming to the other person was sort of initiating the dance of being like, hey, like, I want to have a sex date like this day. And it's kind of fun and like flirty and can be sort of more like when you're originally dating, right? That kind of like, ooh, like we're going to like create like a date. And then the other fun part is everything that builds up in between, and that like you can take that space, like if it's like, oh, that's 4 days from now or whatever it is, to just be like, okay, well, I know in that space, like we're going to have 2 hours that we booked aside that's just for that. But in the meantime, like I'm going to flirt with you. I'm going to, you know, touch your hair when you go by. Like I'm going to send you naughty text messages, whatever it is that like does it for you or the other person, but it builds that up. And sometimes, yeah, some of the best things are in the build up, right? That like feeling of like, yeah, just like getting excited about like your partner who you might see, like, you know, like me and my partner both work from home. Like we see each other all day long, like, right? Like there's a lot of excitement there in that, like, sort of like, oh, like you again, like we're making dinner together. So, but yeah, you can build excitement in between. And then, you know, you had that time, you know, you've prioritized it. And there is like, I will say, and that's like where I get into like the sacred sex practices and polarity practices, a lot to be said about making sure you're coming into that space of that sex state in a certain energy. You don't just like step out of your life and into the bedroom and expect everything to just kind of go accordingly. But yeah, I think that it's a really important thing to do. And that, yes, you know, it's not maybe the most romantic thing on paper, but I can guarantee you when you have time alone with your partner that you've booked, it'll be phenomenal.
I love that. I think that's such good advice, and it's so practical. And I have thought the exact same thing, like, well, that's not very sexy, but it's like when you're originally dating and you get dressed up and you go out and you come home and you still look really hot, and then sex happens versus like you've been living together for forever and you're sitting there in your ratty pajamas, like brushing your teeth. And you're like, hey. So yeah. I really like that. I think that's very valuable advice.
Yeah, it just allows for like us to make sure it happens. Like, I mean, like everyone's like, it's not sexy. I'm like, do you know what's not sexy? Is not having sex.
Do you know what's less sexy? Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. It just, you know, and when you have kids and other priorities, it's like you make sure that like those things are, you know, dealt with in whatever way, babysitter, school, whatever it is, like work, like you put those things on hold. And that's really important, especially for your relationship, to make sure you're prioritizing each other.
Yeah, I love that. Could you tell us more about, you were talking about sacred sex practices. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, like, I really like Taoism. I find that like a lot of the work that I specifically like reference after like learning like most of it is from them. So if Taoism essentially like is a 5,000-year-old like ancient practice from like China, it accompanies like many more things than like just sex. But at the time, the emperor, he did have sex priestesses and priests that he had hired to come up with practices that would give him longevity, that would give like his like royal family pleasure, and mostly because he believes that like your sexual energy is what like allows you to live longer and healthier. So a lot of those practices that are very old and that were pretty much like kind of eradicated because there was actually like a death penalty if you like put to anyone told them beyond like the palace walls, because you know didn't want anyone else to know. So we know it was valuable information, but they kind of weren't like heard about for a really long time. And then more recently, some books and information has come forward and people are like starting to learn them again. And these are ancient like sacred sex practices. And the cool thing is that like now a lot of science like backs it up, which is really amazing, as like you're like, they knew this like so long ago. And it's really about a lot of ways having just as like a sacred relationship with like your sexual energy, and being able to like access and recognize what your sexual energy feels like in your body. So it exists in your sacral chakra, being able to move and circulate it throughout your entire body at like your own will, to like use that energy for creation process, because sexual energy is just creation energy or like womb energy, right? Like we hold it in our womb. A lot of times like we get this idea when I talk about sexual energy, people go like, oh, like it's about sex, but like the physical act of sex that you have in your mind isn't actually in any way related to sexual energy. Sexual energy is creation energy. It is the energy in which we create our whole lives with, we create a baby with. It is pure, like sort of cosmic, like womb energy. And it exists in women like infinitely. We have, because we have wombs, whether you've had it removed or you have one now, you still have that infinite sort of orgasmic creation energy that lives within you as a woman. Men also have access to this as well. And so it's that ability to sort of tap into it, circulate it, pass it on with your partners, and then also have a sacred relationship with your physical anatomy. So like you're like they have like the word Sanskrit word is like yoni, which is like vagina, vulva. In English, we only have like the word like vulva, which would mean like all like the like exterior, and then vagina, so like which is only the vaginal canal, right? So which is interior, but yoni sort of encompasses both of those together, and also like translates roughly into sacred portal. So it's a word that I do like. And yeah, they're big on like having that sacred relationship with that part of yourself for both men and women. And you can implement those practices if you want to get like super deep into it, like I have, in like, really yeah, complicated ways. But you can also, and that is what I do with couples and like also like women, is to teach them how you can implement them in really simple ways. If you've never meditated, if you don't know anything about your sexual energy, you can still implement them in really simple ways that will enhance your sexual pleasure and your intimacy with your partner and your experience of pleasure in your own body.
That's so beautiful. I feel like it can be as simple as just becoming aware of your sacral chakra and just like dropping in, because so many of us, if we've had any kind of trauma or just because we're busy and living hectic lives, like we're operating from here up, like with very little connection to the lower three chakras.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is so much trauma like around like these like chakras, like specifically the sacral. And because we live in like very like masculine energy dominated like world, right? That's very sort of like outcome and like directions and like creating in like that more logical sense of creation. we often like lose sight of that tapping into that feminine sort of womb energy, which is like the creation of like flow, which has no outcome and which is like, you know, easy and like simple and surrendering. And like our world doesn't value that, right? Like we don't value surrender, like we don't value that kind of energy. But that's where we find that is in our sacral chakra, and in especially as a woman, like in like your yoni, that's how she functions, right? The most amazing epic sex you'll have, and like when you begin to use sex as a healing tool, and to experience that infinite orgasmic energy that you have as a woman, will be when you're able to drop into your feminine energy and to surrender and to release an outcome and to soften, because that's literally how like the vulva like works, right? It's like to open. In Sanskrit, like the yoni is like viewed as like a lotus flower. So because a lotus flower has so many petals, it like opens up wider and wider the more engorged like she becomes and the more aroused you become. And that's just about, yeah, softening and surrendering. And that's not always easy when you're out in the world, like running a business and homeschooling your kids and, you know, working a job and trying to do so many other like masculine energy like things.
Even sex could become outcome based if you're just like, okay, like let's get to the point. Let's get to the orgasm, get this over with and get back to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why, like, I often, when I say like book sex dates, I'm like, book a lot of time if you can, like, because like you want to, sex should always be an experience. Like each time it should be totally different. There should never be like an outcome in mind, especially as a woman. Like, as a man, like, if they're going in like in their true like masculine energy, then they should have like some like sort of directives and like that penetrative like energy, so there will be like sort of some outcome for them. But as a woman, like you really need to like tap into that, like just completely releasing control. Like, so that's why when I recommend, like, you know, we come into the bedroom, before you come into the bedroom for your sex date, you have to drop into your feminine, leave all those masculine habits that you did during the day when you just finished, you know, your workout, you just finished planning like your business plan for the next year, whatever it is. You got to drop those at the door and step into your feminine as you move into that space, so that you can really be present in your body. So you experience like pleasure, you can soften and open, and that allows you to receive and your partner to like be in that really like juicy penetrative energy.
I love that. And this isn't a question that I wrote down, but it's something that I always am curious about. What are your thoughts on using feminine energy like in our business? Is there a place for that? Or is there a way to run your business in a really feminine way? Or is it like when you're working on your business, you're in your masculine and then you leave that at the office or wherever and go home and be in your feminine?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think that's a really interesting question, because I think I've been diving like more into that myself, like as I've really healed my relationship with my feminine, and now I'm working like really deeply on healing my relationship with the masculine. And that's so much of the work I've been doing with clients and stuff as well. And I'm finding that for me, it is that being able to turn them on and off. Like the more I come into divine union, it's the more that I can just recognize the spaces that they need to be used in, and then just flip like sort of the switch of like being on and off and being like just really potent in that energy when I can, like just like super in my masculine, I'm at the gym, like super in my masculine, I'm running a class, right? Like, and then like being able to switch into my feminine. I did at first when I like began polarity work like a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, like I can be in my feminine and run a business, like that's not going to be like hard, like because I love being in my feminine, like it's my fucking favorite to be, like it's so juicy and like flowy and just like I love it so much. So I was like, I don't want to be in my masculine, but I realized that that was just like literally me like having like unhealed relationship like with my masculine, and coming up hard against like the idea of having you know, personal devotion and discipline in those like ways. And I think the more that women can lean into healing that relationship with their internal masculine, it'll only reflect back on us with like the men around us, which is always amazing, and also will help us to like run our businesses better and all those things. I mean, hey, like if someone can figure out how to run their business and their feminine, like good on you, but I haven't figured that one out yet.
Either. It seems to me like you were saying that sounds amazing to me, like just being fully in your feminine and running your business. But I also have not found, I think we can bring a lot of qualities of the feminine in, like the creativity and the flow, and the biggest thing that I try to focus on is releasing the outcome and just showing up for my processes. Like, okay, here's what I've committed to, but I'm letting go of needing there to be an outcome from that. So I think that those are beautiful feminine qualities that we can definitely bring into our business. But as far as being fully feminine, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I think that like when you commit to like sort of serving like a bigger purpose, that you always have to face like the outcome. And that's like a very, like you said, like feminine, like energy practice, which I love. And that's definitely always my goal, is like to serve like, you know, the collective the best I can. And yeah, and the more you can stay open to like how that looks, like the better. But when it comes to like sort of the discipline and like devotion of like doing daily tasks and staying like on track and keeping like financials and all these different things, I was like, I don't know how you can do that in your feminine. Yeah. And it's not I'm trying to lean into like being like, I'm good at these things. Like I'm good at these things. And like, I am like, yeah, because I think that there is like a lot of women who feel that way, who are like, you know, and also narratives that were taught to us like that, like, oh, like women aren't that very good at math. Like we're not that good at like science. Like we don't trust them with financial stuff. And it's like, I can do all those things. Don't be ridiculous. I can like hardcore my masculine and like get the job done. So
yes, I love that answer. We talked about this a little bit before, but you shared that almost every woman you've ever met has experienced some level of sexual trauma, just from existing within the convoluted sexual dynamic of our society's views on female pleasure is enough to cause trauma alone, which I agree with. How do you in your work help women to overcome that trauma?
Yeah, this one's like it's so interesting because like so many women will come to me and be like, well, I don't, you know, I have all these problems, like, but like I don't have any sexual trauma. Like, and like they're literally like, you know, just because they weren't like held at gunpoint, like in like a like random alley by a stranger, like and raped, they think like, oh, like I don't have any sexual trauma. I was like, listen, like we all have sexual trauma. Like really, like it's really impossible to have grown up like in our current culture and world. And also like we have deep ancestral sexual trauma. Like we are thousands of years deep now in this, right? Like even if you had your own like most beautiful experiences your whole life, like we still are holding that in our womb, right? So it's very important that we really come to terms first with the things that have happened to us and actually accept that those were traumatic in the moments. Today, like I watched this video of this guy that I follow, and he makes like sort of commentary on people who have videos that he doesn't love. But the other video that the guy was talking about, he was talking about, in his opinion, that women love to talk about how they don't like to be catcalled, but like what they do like being catcalled because it makes them feel like they're attractive. And it was a very like sort of toxic like comment. But what was more interesting to me was the comments underneath it, which there's just thousands of women like just being really honest in that moment, like with their trauma, being like, I was like, you know, catcalled so much when I was like a child, like 14, like 15, like, you know, walking home from school, like, and like that traumatized me. And it's those little tiny things that we need to be really like honest with ourselves. At that moment, you didn't have the ability to process that. Like you didn't, you know, maybe nobody taught you like how to like sit with that fear, sit with like those emotions. But like now you've been carrying them for 15, 30, like whatever amount of years, like, and they build up, right? Like, and it's those things that were inflicted upon us that we need to go like, hey, like, yeah, like I have like a lot of trauma sitting in different areas of my body, probably womb and like yoni, that need to be addressed. That first we just step out, like we just need to like be honest with ourselves and look at them, because that's all any like emotion ever wants, right? Like is just to be witnessed and to be seen. Like all your emotions, like, you know, anger, fear, all these things, they're not bad things. They just need to be witnessed and expressed and seen and then integrated. So that's one of the first steps that we do to help with this. And then from there, we begin to create a sacred relationship with our like yoni. And that's like a really important step in that nobody I know, like I've yet to meet someone who was initiated into when we were younger, right? Like nobody took us through initiations into womanhood and say like, hey, like this is a sacred aspect of your body and this is how you can spend time with her and this is how you can give to her with, again, no outcome, no like, you know, people come and they go like, oh, I want to have all these amazing orgasms you're talking about and all these amazing sexual experiences. And I was like, but first I need you to not want anything from her. I don't want you to want anything from your yoni. First, I just want you to spend time with her. I want you to witness her. I want you to listen to her. She's been trying to speak to you your whole life, your whole life. And I guarantee you, you've been just pushing down that voice every single time. And society has been just pushing down that voice every time. Every time, you know, you had a partner who like didn't like, you know, care about your sexual needs, and you still showed up like, and like let them, you know, you had sex with them. Like, and I'm not saying it wasn't consensual, but like, and you're, you know, maybe your Yoni was like, I don't really like this. Like, I don't really want to be here. And you were just like, well, like, you know, I'm with this person and it's important. And like, and they want sex and like, it's okay. And like, you just completely degrade that trust with her. So it's really about that like relationship and starting there before we move into like sexual pleasure, and that connection with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think you're right. We weren't initiated in healthy. I don't know anyone who, like you said, who learned about that stuff in a healthy way. For me, it was like fundamentalist religion. So don't have sex ever until you're married. And then everything else I learned from reading Cosmo. So unhealthy in one way and then like unhealthy in another way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really like unfortunate reality, but like, I mean, I'm grateful that I get to do this work, and like I have a daughter who's like 11 now, so like eventually she'll get like, you know, initiated into these things. So we're moving and making progress. Um, yeah, but like as women, like we need to be able to do these things for ourselves, like so that we can begin that process of healing that trauma, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how our sexual energy is connected to our creative energy. So I'm excited to hear your answer about this. How does healing and learning to embody our sexuality help us in the rest of our life, not just our sex lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, yeah, sexual energy is creation energy. So essentially, like if you can, when you tap into like your sexual energy and you start moving it and circulating it throughout your body, then you're going to be moving that creation energy. Like you can move it into your third eye, like into your heart, like any area of your body that you feel you need the healing, but also that you want to like expand and create from, right? So you're definitely going to find like that you're like way more in that flow, that creation flow, where you're just like, whoa, like that just got like downloaded in there. That is like, and like that is honestly the best place to be. One of my favorites. And then also you often just feel like you have more energy. I feel like when I talk to women, because like we're infinitely orgasmic, women will be like, oh, like when I have really great sex and orgasms, I actually feel like inspired and like sort of like full of energy afterwards. And my like partner is like passed out like next to me, like cold, right? Yeah, which is a normal product, because like unfortunately for men who don't know like anything about like semen retention, when they release like their like seed, they're like releasing their sexual energy and losing it, so it immediately actually depletes them. So that's why immediately like they're super tired, and like you're like, I'm like infinite in this energy, so like I'm good to go. I just like, yeah, it's definitely like also like an energy boost like for like yourself, like when you begin to like sort of tap into that. When you heal this, you'll also find that like the way like you do with like polarity work, like the way that other like people like view you, and your energy is like different, like the way other women sort of like experience you and men experience you is very different. There's always been for myself like that sort of dynamic energy that I didn't know I had, that yeah, attracts people and like magnetizes people to you. It is important when you have that kind of energy that you know how to sort of weed through who you give your energy to, because it definitely becomes, yeah, it's something that people are sort of magnetized to, and don't really understand like why. You'll see that men show up in a different way in your life, like in a more hopefully masculine way as you drop into your feminine, which means more protection and more provision and more beautiful. Oh, did I freeze?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
No.
Well, that's weird.
Okay, so you were talking about how sex is an energy exchange.
Mhm.
Are you being intentional with the energy you're offering? How can we become more intentional with our sexual energy?
Yes, that one's so important because it is always an energy exchange, right? Like, I mean, I feel like sex gets like sort of like this crazy, like kind of people are like, oh, it's an energy exchange. It's like, listen, every interaction in your life is an energy exchange, okay? Like, every time you hug someone, every time like you talk with someone, like it's energy exchange to some like degree. It's just that sex is like an extremely potent energy exchange. There are very few people you are letting into that like kind of space with you, both physically and like energetically, right? So it's all like, I don't want to like, you know, freak people out by it, like, but it's like, yes, it is a really potent energy exchange. And so it's important that because we can't decide how another person's going to show up, right? I can't control the other person's energy. Often, like when we get into really like sacred sex practices, some people will be like, oh my God, like, you know, how is your partner coming and blah, blah. Listen, once you've got a partner, you don't get to decide how they show up. You can make like active choices to do things like making intentional choices about how you show up in the bedroom before you go on your sex date, that kind of thing. But it's really about being intentional with your energy. So what are you offering, right? And with this, you want to look at with, I always like to use the word worship. People come a little hard on that one. But I like the word worship because that's what I want to be offering. I want to be offering my vulnerability. I want to be offering my heart. I want to be offering full worship, which is really just like being in complete intimacy with the moment and with that person's like energy and body, right? And I want to offer them all of my attention and all of my love in that moment. And I can't control what they're going to offer back, but I hope, you know, with basic energy work that like that's what I'm going to attract. Because anything less than that to me is dissociating from the moment, right? That's so often what people, when they come to me, they're like, oh, you know, like we have sex all the time. And like, but like, I don't have a great time, or like, we have sex all the time. Like, so it's like very often, like people are like, we have sex all the time is like a really common like thing for people to say to me. And I'm like, why do you keep showing up to sex that's not feeling or fulfilling anything good for you? Like, why are you doing it sort of out of obligation, right? Which is often energy that we do when you said like, when you're busy and whatever, you're just like, oh, my partner wants to have sex. Okay, fine. And so you're like lying there thinking about your list of like things you need to do, or like he's like just like using you as a space to like get off, like ultimately. And like none of these things are in any way like a nice energy. Like I don't want to have sex with anyone out of obligation. That doesn't feel nice. I don't want to exchange that energy. I don't want to have sex with anyone who just wants to use me like for like my body, right? Like I want to have like full presence and intimacy. So I think that the more we just tap into ourselves and look at what we're willing to offer, and that can be difficult when you have sexual trauma. Like a lot of people are like, oh, like, but like that sounds like like scary, right? Like, because like intimacy is scary when you are afraid of like that depth, when you're afraid of like knowing yourself that to that depth. But that's why we work on those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that answer. I kind of want to backtrack a little bit to when you were talking about when you like fully turn on your energy and you have this creative magnetic energy and you do, and I've experienced this where you become so attractive to like the entire world. How do you, like, let's say you have experienced trauma and that feeling makes you feel kind of fearful of having so much magnetic energy, and then you shut it down. How do you stay open? I mean, I guess I'm imagining your answer is to just work on healing that trauma, but what would you say to women who, because I've heard this a lot and I've experienced it myself, where you open yourself up and you were turned on and you're just attracting all this stuff, and then you get kind of scared and you shut it down.
Absolutely. Do you know what? It's so funny. I was just at the gym before here, and like I'm like literally on like the treadmill, and like the mantra I'm saying in my head over and over again, it's like, it's safe to be in my body. It's safe to be in my body. Because yeah, like so many, even just going back to the catcalling, like so many women, we get that like very young age, like programming that like it's not safe to be in like your full radiance. It's not safe to be in like your body, like, and be magnetic. And like that's not even like, you know, tapping into, like you said, like when you really start to like move your sexual energy, all these things, like it's like everything, like you said, starts moving around you in this beautiful way, and you're like, whoa, scary, scary, scary. Yeah. Right? This is like too much. And like really it just comes down to like nervous system regulation. Like you have to be able to like be like able to hold that amount, right? And it's okay if you can't as well. It's okay to be like, hey, like this is too much. Like in a moment, like I think that like I've definitely had that where I'm just like, okay, like maybe I'm not quite ready to hold that yet. Like, and that's okay. But definitely nervous system regulation for me, like over the last couple of years, has like totally changed my capacity for what I'm able to hold. Like the amount of pleasure, the amount of abundance, the amount of like attention, like all those things are like really coming down to like whether or not you can feel safe in your body. And I mean, that's a personal journey in itself. But yeah, like legit, it's definitely still something I'm like currently working on. Like I said, mantra all the time, my mantra all the time, I'm like, it's safe to be my body and it's safe to be radiant. And yeah, but it's a journey. I hear that a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And is that something that you help your clients with?
Definitely. Yes. Cause like you said, when you have like those traumas, like you do start to like build up those walls, right? That like, and it's also about like recognizing like not only is it safe to be in those things, but that those have value,
Yeah.
right? Like not only do you build up the walls against like, oh, this is unsafe, but like so many women just like don't even believe like anything about feminine energy has like really like any value. The only thing that they think has value is like those like sort of masculine traits because they've been forced into like, you know, I have to work really hard. Like I have like to run a business, I have to do whatever it is. And then they might have like sort of the very like kind of wounded maiden like idea of like, oh, well, I also have to be really beautiful while I do all of it, opposed to like understanding, and that's all like very like, you know, patriarchal like kind of view on things, understanding that like it's more about that radiance, it's more about that like internal like glow, it's more about your sexual energy, about your feminine energy, and that that has nothing to do with any of those things, and that that has a value. It doesn't just have value in like the way, again, no outcome value, it's a no outcome value, it's that value that makes you feel phenomenal, that makes your life juicy, right? So it's also like, yeah, trying to help people understand that, like with like the feminine energy and stuff, understand that we've lost that over time. Our feminine energy was like erased pretty much from society, and that we need to get back to a place where we realize how valuable it is. And I don't even think as like you know, women who know this work, like I think we're just like literally sitting at like the like beginning, like the tip of the iceberg of how much we can dive like into this. Like I feel like the women in the like past, and I'm talking like really far past, knew this so well, and we're just starting to like remember it, like after being scared shitless out of it, burned alive, like all these things, like as like to have it removed from us. We are now like moving into a space of like, no, like this has value and we need to know this. We need to know how to be connected with like the divine mother. We need to know how to shift our whole world through just our feminine energy. So it's just, yeah, teaching people that as well has like a lot of value.
I love that so much. The way that you said that is just spot on. Like we are just starting to discover how much value our feminine energy actually has.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, so you already answered the question that I was going to ask you about the about being in our feminine, being vulnerable, and the value that that brings. A lot of your posts, you talk about homeschooling, you talk about motherhood and what an initiation that was. I don't have kids, but I just like to, could you tell us a little bit more about what that journey's been like and how it's changed you as a woman?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, whew, that's like yeah, my kids are
The whole episode itself.
right. Yeah. My kids are by far the biggest, like, the thing that has expanded me the most, propelled me for, you know, forward the most in my healing and my spiritual journey. It is definitely by far the hardest thing I have ever decided to take on, and the most beautiful thing I could ever imagine. Choosing to, yeah, homeschool them and really be present in their lives has been a really big part of like my choice. I knew that I was going to do that when I was like literally 16 years old, so it's not like anything new for me. But yeah, like actually going through with it, and for me, it's actually been like a huge healing of my relationship. Like first of all, like sisterhood wounds, like and sort of that I felt so alone, like from at the beginning, like I had children, like I had my daughter, and I was like, I feel so alone. Like, and I could remember, I feel like my cells, like even now, like I feel like my cells could remember like community, like could remember what it would be like to like raise a child like in like a community and like what it should be like. And I was sitting in this house alone, like crying, like with this baby, going like, oh my God, like why am I so alone? Where are my sisters? Like where are like the women I'm supposed to be doing this with? And so it's really like led me down this path of like trying to build that like in every way I can. And homeschooling has helped with that. I'm literally holding a homeschooling summit like in my town like next like month, because I'm like, I want to build community. I want to like gather women, like, and like I want to like heal that sisterhood wound. I want us to do this together, like because like children were meant to be raised by a village. And you know, it's so much more than the family unit, which is a beautiful thing, but it needs to be much larger than that. Like, especially for, as we like, again, step into that feminine energy and understand like the value of how much we can change the world through like our children, through the lessons that we're passing on to each other as women. Like, it's just, yeah, it's been beautiful.
That is so cool. I was also homeschooled.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And it was like, I don't know, it was different. It was in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's different back then. It was very much like a religious thing. And I have no problem with religion. I think that it's beautiful, but kind of the way that it was with us was, it was pretty like fundamentalist and dogmatic. So I love hearing stories of like, I think people are doing it differently now. Like, and I love that. And if I ever had kids, I always swore up and down that I would never do that to my kids, but I just wouldn't do it in the way, like, you know.
Yes, it was done. Yeah. Even still, like, I feel like the homeschooling community sort of like splits in two, like of like people who are like religious, which again, like no judgment. We've had friends who are lovely, like, who are like, who have different religious beliefs, like totally cool, like wonderful people. But they often have like kind of the view of, we want to keep as much secret, like sort of like from the kids. It's sort of like the reason we're doing this is we don't really want you to know like that much. We want to keep the information we're giving you like to like this very strict box of like information, opposed to like the reason we're doing this is like because we want you to have access to fucking everything. Like we want you to experience everything, right? So it's just a very different like vibe, like, and like again, you know, right or wrong, like whatever, everyone's on their own journey. But for us, yeah, it's a lot of like forced schooling, which is like being in like nature, like stable schooling, like horses, like farms, like all that kind of stuff, just having different experiences. And it's pushed me like in ways I've never thought that I would ever do. I went from being like a makeup artist who was like, you know, fully done up every day in Toronto, like high heels, the whole thing, to like, riding horses and walking in chicken poo and stuff.
Do you have chickens?
No, we don't have chickens. Do you know what? Everyone we know has chickens. Literally everyone we know. So we've been like avoiding. We have a neighbor with a large cat colony, so chickens wouldn't make it very far.
Spare the chickens' lives.
Yes.
Thanks from your neighbors.
Yeah.
So I have one more question for you, and then I'll ask you how we can find you on the internet and plug into your work. But you teach that when we open ourselves to being deeply penetrated by life, we also open ourselves to our divine connection and infinite creation power. What are some ways we can become more open to being penetrated by life?
Oh my gosh. I've been digging so far into this lately. Like, I feel like I spent a lot of time doing like the whole like healing thing. And like, listen, like I'm not by any means like saying that wasn't like a huge part of my journey and so needed. But I also feel like I got stuck in it like for a really long time, where I was almost like just like stuck in like the like reading, the learning, the courses, the like I like, and not really actually taking any action, not living it out, like not embodying it in like the world. And I feel like I see a lot of women who are in that, because that's the scary part, right? Like it's scary in one way to do the work of like, you know, the like shadow work, like that's also scary in its own way. But it's also scary to step out into the world and like embody that, and to step out into the world and take the action. And so I've been working a lot on like allowing myself to, like you said, like be penetrated by life, like just stepping outside of my comfort zone, like in every way, and just going into the world with like a fully open heart and like a fully vulnerable state, and being like, okay, like I know in this space that I am logically going to get hurt. Like I have to accept that if I'm going to like experience like the most amazing, pleasurable, beautiful things in the entire world, that also there will be pain, and that my nervous system can handle it and I can handle it. And I've done the work, and I'm going to go out there with my heart open and fucking live life and experience everything and see what kind of amazing juiciness I can attract. So if there's one thing I would say is just be like all in, like go do the thing that you're afraid to do. Like if someone invites you to an ecstatic dance and you're like, I hate dancing, I don't know what I'm doing, fucking go to it, go do it. Like push yourself outside of your comfort zone and go in with that open heart where you're just like, okay, like let's see what happens. Like just, I want to experience, right? Let everything just be an experience. Step out of your head, out of like the like outcome, and just be like, let's see what happens.
Yes. I love that. I think you had a post where you were talking about how healing doesn't have to be like this horrible, painful thing.
Yes.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And I resonate so much with that, because we can get trapped in the self-improvement and the like going into the depths and pulling out of all of our darkness and our shadows. And it can get really heavy, and you can be just healed by life and healed by goodness and healed by love. And it can be light.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And by other women, and then like by dance, and by like, I walked home from the gym today and got stuck in the rain, and I was just like, I'm just going to stay out in the rain. Like, fuck it. Like, it feels amazing. Like, it's just by like living, right? Like, it's just, it, like you said, I really do feel like all of those things, all of the shadow work was necessary. All of it was necessary. And I got stuck. I totally did. I can see in retrospect, like, and I can see other women doing it too, because it's safe feeling, because you're like, oh, now I know how to do this. I got this. But like, go out, allow yourself in your feminine to be penetrated by life, to like be open, and like to also, so much of like being in the feminine is all, and I'm sure you know, is be non-judgmental to both yourself and what shows up, right? Just like kind of like, I was like, I think I'm gonna become like a social scientist. That's what I was saying to my friend. I was like, just gonna like go into the world and like try things, but okay, like instead of like being like, oh my god, that was horrible, oh my god, like all these things, just like, that was interesting, like moving on. Like, right?
Yes, I love that so much. Yeah, it's not always about reading another book or taking another course or hiring another therapist, although I love my therapist. But yeah, it's like you got to go out there and live it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so much of like the work, and it's scary, you know, and I get it, and that's okay to be scared and still do it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. So how can we find you? Do you have any free offers that we can look up or anything like that?
Yeah, so essentially, like right now, I literally yesterday just finally opened up like for new clients. So good timing. So because I was kind of booked solid before that, but yeah, you can always work on me with me one-on-one as a client. I have a whole program for just women called A Compass to Ecstasy, a solo journey, and it's about healing in all the ways that we spoke about. You can also work on me as a couple. I have couples journeys as well. Going forward in September, so soonish, I will be launching 2 master classes. I'm really excited about both of them. I was hoping to get them out faster, but I just spent 2 weeks in the kids hospital with my son, so life has been a little like put to the side. So yeah, but in September, early September, there will be 2 master classes. So instead of like having to work one-on-one with me, and the cost of that, these will be like much easier and accessible for everyone. There will be one on for couples that will be going over all the things we just talked about. So like all the sacred sex practices, how to set a sex date, how to move your sexual energy for just complete beginners. And I'm really excited about it. And another one that is going to be on how to date in like the modern world, and how to heal your masculine while you're dating. So I'm really excited about that one as well. And yeah, those will be coming out really soon.
Perfect. And
So-
you're Siera Jane Grace on
Right.
Instagram,
Yes,
right?
I am. Yep.
With underscores under each, after each. I'll link it in.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
We'll talk soon. And yeah,
Hmm.
thanks so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.